A sudden explosion ripped through the calm waters of the Arabian Gulf as flames burst from the deck of a massive oil tanker moving through one of the most strategically important shipping corridors on Earth. Sailors aboard nearby vessels reported seeing a fireball rise into the sky as alarms echoed across maritime radio channels. Within minutes, distress calls began spreading across the Gulf, signaling that a major incident had just unfolded in one of the most sensitive energy routes in the world. According to Iranian media reports, naval forces connected to Iran's Revolutionary Guard claimed responsibility for striking a U.S.-linked oil tanker traveling through the northern Persian Gulf. Iranian officials said the vessel had been successfully hit and left burning in the water as part of their retaliation in the growing confrontation in the region. The announcement immediately sent shockwaves across global markets and military command centers around the world. A strike against an oil tanker in the Gulf is not simply a localized military incident. It is an event that can shake the foundations of the global energy system. Before we dive deeper into what exactly happened during this strike, what Iran is claiming about the attack, and how this incident is already affecting oil prices across the United States, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the latest dramatic geopolitical developments shaping the world. The tanker that was reportedly struck was navigating waters that serve as a vital artery for global energy trade. Every single day, enormous vessels loaded with crude oil pass through the Gulf, carrying millions of barrels of energy supplies toward international markets. The Gulf region sits at the heart of the global oil system. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates all export massive quantities of crude oil through these waters. Their tankers travel through the narrow Strait of Hormuz before entering the Arabian Sea and continuing toward refineries around the world. That narrow corridor is one of the most important choke points in global trade. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply moves through this region. When something happens here, whether it's a military clash, a shipping disruption, or a tanker attack, energy markets react instantly. That is exactly what happened after the reported strike. Iranian officials described the attack as a direct response to the broader confrontation unfolding in the region. Iranian state media suggested that naval forces had targeted the tanker deliberately in order to send a message about control of Gulf waters. In their statements, Iranian commanders claimed that ships associated with their adversaries would no longer move freely through the region if hostilities continued. The message was unmistakable. The waters of the Arabian Gulf had become part of the battlefield. The tanker that was reportedly struck began sending emergency signals shortly after the explosion. Reports from the area suggested that flames spread across parts of the ship as the crew attempted to control the fire and secure the vessel. Nearby ships monitored the situation closely while maritime authorities began coordinating emergency responses. Meanwhile, analysts around the world began asking a critical question. What does an attack on an oil tanker mean for the global economy? The answer is simple. It means uncertainty. Energy markets depend on stability and predictable supply routes. When a tanker is attacked in one of the world's most critical shipping lanes, traders begin calculating the possibility that more attacks could follow. And if attacks continue, the flow of oil through the region could be disrupted. The first reaction came from energy traders watching oil futures markets. Within hours of the reports emerging, oil prices began climbing as fears spread that the conflict might interfere with global supply chains. Markets started pricing in the possibility that the Gulf could become unsafe for commercial shipping. Oil traders know that even small disruptions in the Gulf can trigger massive reactions. The reason is simple. If tankers stop moving, oil stops moving. And when oil stops moving, prices rise. Shipping companies began monitoring the situation carefully. Some vessels slowed their routes while awaiting updated security guidance. Maritime organizations warned that ships traveling through the region should maintain extreme caution. Insurance companies also began reassessing their coverage for tankers operating in the area. War risk insurance is required for ships traveling through dangerous waters. When tensions escalate, those insurance premiums can rise dramatically. Higher insurance costs make it more expensive for companies to ship oil. And those extra costs eventually make their way into fuel prices. The United States began feeling the effects almost immediately. Energy markets inside the country reacted as traders anticipated disruptions in global supply chains. Diesel prices surged sharply, climbing past $4 per gallon for the first time in nearly 2 years, as the conflict in the Middle East tightened fuel supplies. That spike in diesel prices has consequences far beyond gas stations. Diesel fuel powers much of the U.S. economy. Trucks delivering food to supermarkets run on diesel. Freight trains transporting goods across the country rely on diesel engines. Farmers operating agricultural machinery depend on diesel to plant and harvest crops. When diesel prices increase, transportation costs rise across the entire economy. That means food prices can increase. Shipping costs rise. Manufacturing expenses climb. Inflation pressures build. In other words, a tanker strike thousands of miles away can quickly begin affecting daily life for people in the United States. Energy analysts warn that the situation could become even more serious if attacks on tankers continue. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most sensitive energy choke points in the world. When shipping through the strait becomes dangerous or restricted, global oil supplies can tighten dramatically. Recent data shows that the conflict has already disrupted shipping across the region, forcing some vessels to avoid the Gulf entirely. At the same time, oil prices have already surged due to fears of prolonged conflict and shipping disruptions in the region. Markets understand the risks. If tankers cannot safely travel through the Gulf, global oil supply could drop sharply. That possibility has led analysts to warn that oil prices could surge dramatically if the situation worsens. Some forecasts suggest crude oil could approach the $100 per barrel level if disruptions in the region continue. Such a spike would send fuel prices climbing across the United States. Gasoline prices could rise sharply. Diesel prices could increase further. Transportation costs would climb. Airlines would face higher jet fuel expenses. Shipping companies would see costs surge. The ripple effects would spread across the entire global economy. Meanwhile, military forces across the region began moving into a heightened state of alert. The United States Navy maintains a strong presence in the Gulf specifically to protect shipping routes and ensure the free flow of energy supplies through the Strait of Hormuz. Following reports of the tanker strike, naval patrols in the region intensified. Warships began monitoring shipping lanes more closely, while surveillance aircraft scanned the waters for additional threats. The challenge facing military planners is enormous. The Gulf is crowded with ships. Oil tankers, cargo vessels, fishing boats, and military ships all share the same narrow waterways. Protecting every vessel traveling through the region is extremely difficult. That is why tanker attacks have historically been one of the most destabilizing developments in maritime conflicts. They do not simply damage one ship. They threaten the entire system that keeps global energy flowing. The strike on the tanker also sent a powerful strategic message. It demonstrated that the conflict is no longer confined to military bases or land targets. Energy infrastructure and shipping routes are now directly in the crosshairs. For Iran, targeting oil shipments can serve as a powerful leverage tool. By threatening global energy supply, Tehran can pressure adversaries economically as well as militarily. For the United States and its allies, however, tanker attacks represent a direct threat to global commerce. That is why incidents like this can quickly escalate tensions. Governments around the world are watching developments in the Gulf extremely closely. Energy importing nations in Asia and Europe rely heavily on oil shipments passing through these waters. If shipping disruptions continue, those countries could face energy shortages or dramatic price increases. Some countries maintain strategic petroleum reserves to cushion against supply disruptions. But those reserves are limited. If the conflict continues for an extended period, even those reserves may not be enough to stabilize markets. Back in the United States, policymakers are closely monitoring the impact of rising fuel prices. Energy costs are a major factor in inflation and economic stability. Sharp increases in gasoline and diesel prices can quickly become political issues. That is why developments in the Arabian Gulf are being tracked carefully in Washington. For now, the situation remains fluid. The tanker that was reportedly struck remains the focus of international attention as investigators attempt to determine the full extent of the damage and the circumstances surrounding the attack. Maritime authorities continue to warn ships operating in the region to exercise extreme caution. Insurance companies are reviewing risk levels. Energy traders are watching markets closely. And military forces remain on high alert. The strike on the oil tanker may be just one event in a much larger conflict, but its consequences are already being felt around the world. From shipping lanes in the Arabian Gulf to fuel stations across the United States, the ripple effects are spreading rapidly. One explosion in the Gulf has reminded the world just how fragile global energy supply chains can be. And as tensions continue to unfold, one question remains at the center of the global conversation. Will this tanker strike remain an isolated incident? Or is it the beginning of a larger campaign targeting the global oil supply? Stay tuned for more updates as this situation continues to develop, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss the latest dramatic geopolitical developments shaping the future of global energy markets.